Today we're going to be talking about the perks in Fallout 4 and we're going to be ranking them on our tier list. So for tiers, we do have every kind of tier here from F to S. Some of these I'll be talking about all of the ranks of because they do change quite a lot. Other ones I'm just going to give a brief overview because they're basically interchangeable with other perks. Our very first one is Iron Fist, and for every time that you take Iron Fist, you get 20% more damage with your punches. You also get a couple other bonuses where you get a chance to disarm opponents. You also have increased chance to cripple limbs, and you can also potentially paralyze enemies in VATS. So you get like paralyzing palm with this. Now all that is pretty good, and this would be absolutely amazing to have in some of the other Fallout games. Unfortunately, in Fallout 4, I find that the Iron Fist isn't really that great because unarmed isn't really that great. Unarmed, you don't really have a whole bunch of different weapons to play around with. There are some that are very strong. The Power Fist and the Deathclaw Gauntlet can be really good. More so depending on legendary effect, because legendary effects kind of break this game overall, so you don't always need just damage on it anyway. The weapon itself might be strong enough to win. And other than that, you're probably just going to be using power armor for your unarmed attacks. That can actually be extremely strong, and you don't need very much perk investment for it. You can be really kind of overpowered at the start of the game. It does kind of fall off later compared to other fighting styles that you can have throughout Fallout 4. And sadly, like, unarmed and melee in this game just don't feel as good to me as they do in the previous games, like in Fallout New Vegas and in Fallout 3. So I'm going to put Iron Fist up into B tier. I think it's still pretty good. Up next, we have Big Leagues, which is basically the same as Iron Fist, but this is for melee weapons. So every rank of this, up to 5, you get 20% more damage, so you can potentially double it once it's fully maxed out. And you get a couple other bonuses, like being able to cripple limbs, being able to hit multiple targets in front of you, and also increased chance to cripple limbs. Melee is a little bit better than unarmed in my opinion in Fallout 4, mostly because you can also combine it with power armor, and that makes it a bit stronger, so you can just kind of face tank your way up to an enemy and hit them. Unfortunately, if you get into melee combat with another melee unit, it's really awkward because of how often the AI will just block, and you can't do a whole lot about it, so some of your fights take a long time. If you're only fighting gun enemies and you can rush them down, this can work really well, but if you are just constantly fighting melee enemies like super mutants, especially once you get up to like the super mutant, I think it's overlords and masters in this, where they can actually take quite a bit of a beating and deal it out back to you, and they might have really strong melee weapons too. Melee weapons can be good if you get a shish kebab, you get a super sledge. It can actually be really good with certain legendary effects too, like the legendary Ripper that has the stagger on it is pretty crazy, but that's its own unique weapon that's crazy regardless of how you want to build. So I would say Big Leagues is a little bit better than Iron Fist because I find melee weapons a little bit more useful than unarmed, so I'm going to put this A tier. I don't think it's quite S tier though. I've always found a melee build in Fallout 4 to be a little bit awkward. For our next perk, we've got Armor, and Armor has 4 ranks rather than 5 ranks. And for each rank of this, you can get increased bonuses to adding on to armor. You can customize your armor a little bit more. This can be pretty good, although you don't necessarily need that much investment into this. It can be very useful if you want to upgrade your power armor. It can be very useful if you want to upgrade your regular armor that you are wearing, or if you intend on getting the ballistic weave, then this one is really strong. So it kind of makes every build a lot stronger, and there's not really a reason to not go for armor. You don't necessarily need to invest in this right away, but if you want to just rush, do the ballistic weave quest, and then be able to attach that to any armor, this one's really, really good, and it's hard to not say that it's like A or S tier. I'm going to put it into S. It's super handy to have, and probably the most useful one, because once you get that, then you can kind of wear whatever you'd like, and it's a lot more difficult to get armor that you would like to use throughout the whole game than it is to just find weapons laying around, even if they don't have the most optimal mods on them. Blacksmith is also a weapons building or mod building perk. This one you can get 3 ranks of, and for each rank, this gives you more melee and unarmed options when working at a workbench. Now, the good thing about melee and unarmed is that they don't require very much components to actually craft, which is great. And this can help them be quite a bit stronger. And if you are going with a dedicated melee or unarmed build or both, there's no reason for you not to have Blacksmith. But I don't think it's entirely necessary. There's a decent amount of melee weapons you can find with decent attachments already on them. So I'm going to put Blacksmith into B tier. I think it's pretty good, but not necessary. And it would be much lower if you're not going with any melee or unarmed whatsoever. Then there'd be no reason to put points into this, and it would go right down to F tier for your build. Heavy Gunner gives you 20% more damage with all heavy weapons. For each rank that you can get this 5 times, so you can go up to double damage. You can also get increased chance of staggering enemies, and for 2 of the ranks, it decreases the spread of them. The heavy weapons I honestly don't find myself using that much in Fallout 4, though. Some of them can be pretty good and some of them can benefit from this. Others not so much, like the Fat Boy doesn't really benefit from this. You're probably going to kill stuff with it, no problem. The Fat Man with mini nukes. That one, it doesn't really matter. The missile launcher, this can help. Minigun, Gatling laser, flamethrower, this one can all help. Same goes with some of the more exotic weapons like the broadsider or the harpoon gun. So if you are going with a dedicated heavy weapons build, then this one is pretty good. Since I've usually been playing on like the survival difficulty or modified survival difficulty to where I have to worry about weight, I basically never take big guns unless it's just really convenient to pick one up and start firing at it. Like if I find a missile launcher with a couple missiles, I might fire them at whatever the next enemy I see is and then just toss it on the ground. I'm not necessarily going to build for this. So this one I think is probably one of the weaker ones for actually building into a specific class, just because I don't know of a whole lot of people that build for heavy weapons. If you are going with heavy weapons, then this one's going to be a staple and you're always going to take it. For everybody else, I would say this one's like C tier. It's kind of convenient to have, especially if you just find yourself scavenging or playing gun game in Fallout. Then sure, go for it. It's not bad by any means. Up next we got Strong Back, and you can get 5 ranks of this, at least if you have all the DLCs. And Strong Back does change each time that you get it. For the first one, you get 25 additional carry weight. After that, it's an additional 50 carry weight. Then for the third rank, it's you can use action points when over encumbered to run still. Fourth rank is that you can fast travel while over encumbered. That can be pretty good if you're playing on the normal difficulty. If you're playing on survival, then it's just you don't cripple your limbs, which is also a little bit useful. And then the fifth rank is when you're over encumbered and running, then it takes 50% less of your action points away. This one on like survival difficulty, I would say the first 2 ranks or the first 3 ranks are probably like S tier, and then after that the other 2 ranks don't really matter. If you're playing this on the normal difficulty, I think that this one's still like an A or a B tier. It's really nice to have a quality of life perk like this just on any build where you can carry around more stuff. If you're playing on normal difficulty, or at least just non-survival or non-survival with the fast travel modded, that's actually what I like to do. I would say it's probably like B tier. It's nice to have, but not entirely necessary. Because you can always fast travel, grab a bunch of the gear, loot, whatever you're trying to do, fast travel to your base, drop everything there, and then fast travel right back and collect whatever else you needed to. You don't necessarily need a perk for this, but, I mean, getting the 3rd rank of this is pretty good anyway. After that, I wouldn't really recommend going with the 4th or 5th rank. It's not really worth it unless you just have extra perk points that you're fine with throwing anywhere, which you might in Fallout 4. Then we have Steady Arm, which has 3 ranks, again, so long as you have DLCs. And what Steady Arm does is it makes it so your hip fire is more accurate. That is pretty nice. That's actually a really nice quality of life perk too. There's nothing really wrong with this. Certain weapons this isn't really going to help. If you're hip firing a rocket launcher, probably won't matter. If you're hip firing a shotgun, also probably won't matter. But if you're hip firing something like an assault rifle or submachine gun, this one will help quite a bit. So a nice quality of life perk. Probably like B tier. I think it's pretty decent. Basher makes it so whenever you hit somebody with your gun, you deal more damage with it. So you get 25% per level, and there's 4 levels with this. That sounds kind of good, but bashing enemies is honestly probably the weakest way that you could injure enemies out of any of the fighting styles. Because if you're using melee weapons, who cares? You're not going to be using that. You're just going to be using heavy attacks and power attacks. Same thing goes with unarmed. You're probably not going to bother using this with regular guns, big guns of any kind. So Basher is just, it's kind of a meh perk. The damage is actually pretty decent that you can get out of it, but it's really not worth going for. So I'd say this one's D tier, maybe F tier. It's really not that good, and I wouldn't really recommend it on any build unless you're going with like a challenge run. Rooted has 3 ranks, and for each rank you take less damage, at least damage resistance, and you also deal more melee and unarmed damage so long as you're standing still. At least for the first 2 ranks. The 3rd rank makes it so that you can disarm enemies, melee enemies, once you're fighting them. This one sounds kind of good, but honestly it doesn't work that well in a lot of practice, because a lot of the time you don't want to be standing still just trying to melee or unarm something. You can if it's another melee enemy that you're just sitting there brawling with. That can work, and the damage resist you get from this is pretty decent. But there's so many times where it's not going to come into play. You're going to try to rush down enemies if you're using a melee or an unarmed build, so you're going to be moving pretty quick. And with the next perk in mind, you can also kind of make use with this, but it's only going to be good in a one-on-one situation against another melee or unarmed enemy. So Rooted is very situational, although the damage resist and the damage that you get is pretty decent, so I'm going to say it's C tier overall. And then for our last perk in Strength, we have Pain Train. Pain Train is super fun. Pain Train makes it so if you're wearing power armor and you sprint towards an enemy, you can knock it over, and sometimes you get some really hilarious ragdolls with this. Sometimes this does really high damage. Once it's fully maxed out, you can basically run over anything. That can also be really good for certain enemy types that move really fast and are difficult to hit. So some of the bug enemies. You do need to have power armor for this, and I know not everybody likes using power armor in a playthrough, but it is a super fun perk, even though it's not always necessary. A lot of the time, even when I had power armor and had this thing maxed out, in any of my playthroughs, I usually forgot to use it anyway. So for a melee and unarmed build, I would say this is like B or A tier. For every other build, I would say it's like C tier. It's funny. It's really funny, and sometimes the ragdolls you can get are hilarious, but it's not entirely necessary by any means. Next special stat is Perception, and first up we have Pickpocket. Pickpocket has 4 ranks, and Pickpocket makes it so that you can pick people's pocket easier. Most of the time I don't really bother pickpocketing enemies, especially in Fallout 4, because most of them don't have any sort of unique weapon that you need to trade for, or you can get by like reverse pickpocketing like you can in the other Fallout games. So I don't find this to be super useful. It can be a little bit useful somewhat early on if you just want to be stealing ammo from enemies. That can work, and if you're really going for like an assassin playstyle. But pickpocketing, I would say, is probably like one of the weaker strategies you can use in Fallout 4, and I'd put it like D tier. I don't think it's really necessary, but it is kind of fun. Rifleman has 5 ranks, and this gets you 20% more damage per rank with semi-automatic rifles, or anything that counts as a semi-automatic. So this would also be single shots, bolt actions, basically anything that's not full auto. And when it's maxed out, it also ignores 30% of the enemy's armor, and it has a chance to cripple limbs with it. This is really strong because most of the strongest weapons in the game are just semi-automatic rifles, or can be some of the strongest that are just semi-automatic rifles. It is very, very strong. Like the splatter cannon is ridiculous, but that's just because that weapon is ridiculous. So I find this one to be quite strong and kind of one of my go-tos for damage. I would say that this one is probably like S tier 2, maybe on the lower end, but a lot of the time I see people running rifles or shotguns or any sort of long gun that gets a bonus from this. So this one works well with a lot of weapons that you can pick from. Our next perk is Awareness, which you can get 2 ranks of. Both these you can actually get at very low ranks, but Awareness isn't really the greatest perk because you can view a target specific damage resist in VATS. And you can also get 5% more damage in VATS, which 5% more damage in VATS isn't really that great. Knowing that your enemy's weakness doesn't matter that much, especially with a lot of builds. If you're going with like a dedicated melee build, sure, you could equip a melee weapon that does a little bit more damage to it because it has some sort of status effect, but a lot of the time you're not going to care. You're just going to batter it until it's dead anyway with whatever your biggest, baddest weapon is, and that's kind of how every build is going to go about combat, probably. So I would say Awareness is probably like F tier. I think it's our first F tier perk. It's just not necessary on any build. Then we have Locksmith. This one you get 4 ranks of, and it makes it so you can pick harder and harder locks. And it makes it so you also have unbreakable lockpicks in the end. This one's really good. There's plenty of high-level locks that you can break into, and you're probably going to max this out on basically any character. So I would say this one's like A tier. It's just solid all the way around. You don't need to max it right away, but you're not going to complain if you throw a couple points into this at any point in the game. Up next we have Demo Expert. You can get 4 ranks of this, and this gets you 25% more damage per rank with explosive weapons. Explosive weapons already hit really hard. This is going to help the not super high-end explosive weapons like the Fat Man. You don't really need damage with the Fat Man. It already has enough damage on it. But this will help with things like the missile launcher, frag grenades, frag mines, really any sort of the thrown explosives. There's not a ton of explosives, but you can always equip frag grenades or Molotovs or anything like that on your character and just chuck these out. And once you get 2 ranks in this, you can also see the grenade arc, which is pretty useful too. So if you're going with a dedicated explosives build, this is going to be a staple. If you're not, this one's probably like B or A tier. I think I'm going to put it like A tier because the grenades are actually pretty useful just for breaking up crowds or throwing around corners just to check for enemies. Night Person has 3 ranks, at least if you have the Far Harbor DLC. And what Night Person does is between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., you get +2 intelligence and +2 perception. Unless you upgrade it once, and then it's +3 intelligence and +3 perception. And then the final rank just gets you 30 extra health. Night Person honestly isn't that great because these temporary buffs don't really help like they do in the other Fallout games. Buffing up temporary stats with perception and intelligence doesn't really matter. And getting 30 extra health, you can do that with a better perk. So Night Person is one of those perks that's just very underwhelming. I think it's going to be D tier because it still has some use, but not very much. It's bordering on like F tier. Up next we have Refractor. This perk is super simple. You get 10% more energy resist for 5 levels. So you can get up to 50% energy damage reduction. That can be pretty good into the later game of Fallout 4 where you might be fighting the Brotherhood or the Institute, which tend to use a lot of energy weapons. Really doesn't help you in the early game though. There's not going to be a whole lot of enemies that use energy weapons. Most of the time they're using standard weapons. So this one gets better as the game goes on, but isn't super strong early on. So towards the end game, I'd say this is like A tier. For most of the game, I'd say it's like B tier. It's never going to be bad to have because extra damage resist is good on any character, no matter how you want to play. Sniper you can get 3 ranks of, and Sniper makes it so with non-automatic scoped rifles, you get various bonuses. So you can hold your breath longer with the first rank, you can knock down the target with a 15% chance on the second rank, and you can also get 25% more accuracy for headshots in VATS. I don't really use VATS a whole lot in Fallout 4. I find it rather awkward to be using, and holding your breath longer doesn't really matter with the scoped rifles. Usually you're not hard scoping in for a long time in Fallout 4. It's usually you see something, you zoom in, you fire, you reset, you fire again and again until it's dead. Can be kind of useful, but honestly I think this might be the weakest version, or one of the weakest versions of Sniper that we've seen in the Fallout games. And I would say that this one's like D tier. I really don't think it's great on a VATS build either. I think there's better VATS perks than this one. Then we have Penetrator, which Penetrator is kind of a wonky perk. You can get 2 ranks of this, and this makes it so whenever you're aiming in VATS, even if an enemy goes behind cover, you can still hit them. Which sounds really good, but a lot of times enemies don't try to take cover when you're firing at them. Sometimes they'll just charge right at you, in which case this doesn't really matter. If there's no cover around, this also doesn't really matter. And if you're not using a VATS build, then this also doesn't really matter. However, this is a very fun perk to use and a really cool one. So when you do get to use this in like a VATS build, it is actually pretty good, but it doesn't pop up as often as you would think. Most of the time you're just shooting at enemies out in the open, so I'd say this one's like B tier. I think it's fine enough. Concentrated Fire makes it so every time that you select a body part in VATS, you get more accuracy to this. You also get more damage, at least once this is fully maxed out, which can be pretty good. If you're using a dedicated VATS build, then this one is going to be your go-to, and it's going to be a pretty decent source of damage that you can get out of it. If you're not using VATS like me, you're never going to take it, in which case it would be like an F tier perk. But for a VATS build, I would probably say this one's like A tier. I think it's pretty good. Moving on to Endurance. Our very first Endurance perk is Toughness. Toughness is like Refractor here, where you get 10% more damage resist per rank up to 5 ranks, so you can get 50% damage resist. Toughness is never going to be bad on any character, and this one starts out pretty strong because everything is probably going to hit you just with regular damage to start out with, and I think it is stronger than Refractor, at least for the start of the game. It still stays really strong all throughout the game. So I would say Toughness is probably like S tier as well. You also just don't need as much investment into Endurance as you do with Perception, because this is what, a level 7 Perception? This is level 1 Endurance. You can get this right out the gate, and it's really strong on any build, so I'd put it up into S tier. I think it's pretty good. Then we've got Lead Belly, which Lead Belly in Fallout 4 might be the strongest version of Lead Belly in the Fallout series, which isn't saying a whole lot, but it might be better than some of the other options. So Lead Belly makes it so you don't get radiation from eating and drinking, or at least as much radiation from eating and drinking. You can get this 3 ranks. That's actually not a bad quality of life perk to have in Fallout 4. It's by no means necessary on any build because it's not difficult to find Radaway. You can always find it, or find a doctor to fix you. Radiation usually isn't a huge problem unless you're in certain areas where there's either high radiation or there's enemies using like the gamma guns. But I would say that Lead Belly does have a little bit of a use, so I'd put it up into D tier, which is being a little bit generous, but I'm going to put it there. Slightly better than something like Awareness. Life Giver makes it so you get more maximum health. You get 20 more max health per rank of this, up to 3 ranks, so you can get 60 more max health. And you also slowly regen on the last point of this. The regen's actually pretty good. The regen does help quite a bit, and extra health is going to be nice on any character. However, it doesn't give you a ton of extra health, so you don't really need to rush this perk or anything. It's just going to be one that you throw extra perk points into. I would say it's like B tier, maybe C tier, somewhere around there. I think it's okay enough. And then we've got Chem Resist. Chem Resist is awesome. Chem Resist has 2 ranks. With the first rank, there's a 50% chance that you won't get addicted to it, or at least 50% added onto your already existing chance of getting addicted. And then for the second rank, it makes it so you can't get addicted to anything. That is really, really good, especially when you can easily get Jet. You can easily get all the different drug combinations in this. You can easily just make some of the strongest chems right out the gate. This one's really good, and this one I would say is probably also like S tier on most characters, especially if you plan on taking any of the chems. Not being addicted to them and not having the downsides of them are really, really strong, especially with some of the strongest combat drugs like the Jet, the Medics, the Psycho. The standard like go-to ones in the Fallout series. It is really, really strong. Then we have Aqua Boy / Aqua Girl. This one for the first rank makes it so you never can drown underwater, which is useful, and you also don't take radiation damage. And then the second rank of this makes it so that you are undetectable underwater. Being undetectable underwater doesn't really matter, and honestly, breathing underwater doesn't matter either. There's very few locations where you're going to need to swim underwater for a long period of time. Basically, it's just to explore, and that's about it. If you know where the items are that you're looking for under the water, or roughly where they are, you'll find them pretty easily. And this one is probably also like another F tier perk. It sounds kind of cool, and it honestly, just taking 1 point of this isn't a huge investment or anything, so if you do have extra perks, sure, go for it. You don't need to take 2 perks of this, though. It's not really worth it. Then we've got Rad Resist. Rad Resist makes it so you get 10 more Rad Resist per rank of this, up to 4 ranks. That can be good unless you're using Power Armor, in which case then there's no real reason for this, because Power Armor is going to give you all the radiation resist that you need. If you're not taking that, then this can be a decent option. The main problem with this is either that you usually have enough meds to not worry about the radiation, you have Power Armor on, in which case you're not worried about the radiation, or you have at least a set of Power Armor that you can equip fairly quickly just to run to irradiated areas, in which case you also don't really need this. Rad Resist, I would say, is like D tier. I don't think it's really necessary on any build. It's not terrible, though. If you want to throw extra perk points into it, go for it, but I wouldn't prioritize it. Then we've got Adamantium Skeleton. Adamantium Skeleton makes it so your limbs break less. That can be good. It also doesn't matter all the time, because if you're wearing power armor, you likely don't care if your limbs break, and it's not particularly difficult to fix broken limbs in Fallout 4. So this isn't like in New Vegas where you have like the survival difficulty. You have to find either a doctor or doctor's bags, in which case this can be a little bit more useful. In Fallout 4, it's really not necessary, but again, it's similar to like the Rad Resist. It's okay to throw points into it if you want to. Then we've got Cannibal, which Cannibal is pretty hilarious too. You can get 3 ranks of Cannibal in this, to where you can eat humans right away, then you can eat ghouls and super mutants, and then you can eat ghouls, super mutants, and humans and restore a significant amount of your health back. That sounds kind of good, but when you can eat regular food, when you can drink regular water, and when you can take stim packs, and when there's so many stim packs throughout Fallout 4, this doesn't matter that much. Cannibal is definitely made for more of a immersion build, where you are trying to go out of your way to make use of Cannibal, and it doesn't honestly help you that much. Maybe with certain mods it does, but in the base game there's so much healing items that it doesn't really matter. I would put Cannibal F tier. There's no real reason to take it, unless you just think it's funny. Ghoulish has 4 ranks, at least if you have the Nuka World DLC, and Ghoulish makes it so radiation now regenerates lost health, and once it's maxed out, it not only regenerates faster, but it also decreases the amount of total radiation that you can have. That is actually really nice to have, and a really nice quality of life perk. It's by no means necessary, though. Again, you can heal yourself up quite fast in this game. So I would say Ghoulish is probably like C tier. You also need a huge amount of investment in endurance for this at 9. So it does take a little bit of leveling up to get that, unless you just ran 9 endurance right away. Not a bad perk, though. Actually a pretty cool perk if you want to max it out. And then our last endurance perk is Solar Powered. Solar Powered you can get 3 times, and this makes it so between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. you get +2 strength and endurance. This also makes it so you heal lost health over time, and you also heal radiation damage over time. That can be pretty nice too. Again, this does take 10 endurance though, so I'm going to put this one like C tier as well. It's nice to have, but if you're not going with a high amount of endurance, it's by no means necessary, so you don't really need to rush endurance for it. Alright, then we move on to the Charisma tree, which Charisma is actually really good in Fallout 4, weirdly enough. We have Caps Collector as our very first Charisma perk. You can get this 3 ranks, and this makes it so you can buy and sell better from vendors with all of them. That's kind of useful, but not entirely necessary. Vendors in Fallout 4 tend not to have a whole lot of very useful stuff that you need, unless it's right at the start where you might need meds, bullets, maybe some new weapons to use. But after a little while, it becomes apparent that you can just kind of find all the weapons and gear that you would ever need, especially if you're playing on the higher difficulties where there's legendary enemies. You're probably going to be getting way better weapons than what most of the merchants sell, with a few exceptions that are just solid overall weapons like the Overseer's Guardian or like the Spray and Pray. So I would say this one is probably like D tier. Not necessary, but a nice bonus, and it only requires 1 charisma, so not terrible to grab early on, or even if you want to save it for later, it's still pretty decent. Then we have Lady Killer / Black Widow. This depends on whether you're male or female, and this makes it so you get 5% more damage against either male or female characters, whoever the opposite gender is. You can also combine this with the Intimidation perk, which we'll talk about in a little bit, to pacify people, which can be kind of useful. But honestly, that's more for like a pacifist run. This one is okay, but honestly, it doesn't give you that much more bonus to it, so I'm going to say this one's like D tier too. I don't think it's way great, Unless, again, you're going on a pacifist run, in which case then it's quite a bit higher. Lone Wanderer gives you bonuses so long as you're alone without companions. With the exception of Dogmeat, you can still have Dogmeat with you because he doesn't count as a companion for whatever reason. You can have 4 ranks of this, and the first rank makes it so you take less damage and you can carry more. The second rank is just a bonus upon that first rank. The third rank makes it so you get 25% more damage when you're alone. And then the fourth rank makes it so that whenever you're adventuring without companions, you also get 25 more action points. Lone Wanderer is a fantastic perk. A lot of the time, I'm not taking companions throughout Fallout 4. If you are doing a heavy companion run, then this one is quite a bit worse. But I would say this is one of the best perks in Fallout 4. I would say that this one is S tier, because the amount of bonuses it gets you with very little investment is just so hard to pass up. And speaking of Dogmeat, we have Attack Dog next. This one just buffs Dogmeat. If you like using Dogmeat, this one's pretty cool. The buffs aren't anything crazy for this. He can cause bleed, which bleed is pretty good. He does take less damage. He deals more damage. It's nice if you like taking Dogmeat, but not necessary. I would say this one's like C tier. Then we have Animal Friend, and this makes it so you can potentially pacify animals throughout the wasteland. This can also be pretty useful, at least early on. Later into the game, it's not really necessary because you can likely just kill whatever you're fighting. But early on, this can be really useful if you run into like a Yalguai or something and you have a chance to potentially pacify it. So for that, it has some use, but not a ton, and I don't find myself using it a whole lot. I'd say this one's like C tier as well. Then we have Local Leader. This one is one that you might go for with Charisma just for the convenience of it. It's honestly not a great perk by itself, but you'll find that if you're playing on like survival difficulty, it's just annoying to constantly not have stations to build stuff at. What Local Leader does is make it so you can set up supply lines between any sort of settlement, which can be pretty useful. And then the second part of it makes it so you can build workshops and stations and stores and stuff. That's kind of the main reason why you want it, just for the convenience of it, but it's not necessary. Especially if you're playing on normal difficulty, then this one's really not that good because you can fast travel somewhere where they have all of the stuff that you can build. And in that case, it'd probably be like D or F tier. It's still not great, but it's one that I usually take just so that I can use the convenience of it by putting things down. Next, we have Party Boy / Party Girl. This one makes it so you can no longer get addicted to alcohol. You double the effect of alcohol bonuses, and you also get 3 more luck if you want to go with the third rank of it. That's actually not too bad. 3 more luck can be pretty useful if you're going to the VATS build. If you're not going to the VATS build, then this one isn't that great. And honestly, this isn't necessary either. It's nowhere near as good as like Chem Resist or Chemist, which will be coming up. But it's okay enough. I'm going to say it's like the low end of C tier, bordering on D tier. Inspirational makes it so your companions take less damage, your companions do more damage, and they can carry more stuff. This one's hard for me to say is good. It is good on a dedicated companion build. But when you have Lone Wanderer, which is just so good by yourself, it's hard to want to take this as well. Again, it works on Dogmeat because he does count as a companion, but not towards Lone Wanderer. So if you just have him, this one's pretty decent. If you don't, then this one's really not that great. And I would say it's like C tier if you're going with dedicated Lone Wanderer and Dogmeat build. If you want to take other characters, then this one could be up a little bit higher. Then we have Wasteland Whisperer. This one makes it so you can aim at wasteland creatures and you can potentially pacify them. This kind of works on anything, so you can use it on like bloatflies, rad scorpions, stuff like that, and there's just a chance that this will work. It is kind of funny, but investing 9 charisma to get this is really not that great. You're probably going to go with a high amount of charisma because it does go with speech checks though, and that is very useful, but this one is just not really like the reason why you want to be going that high, so I would say this one's like D tier as well. Really not necessary. Intimidation makes it so you can pacify enemies, and then you can potentially command them to attack other enemies, which sounds pretty fun, and it kind of is, but it's not as effective as just killing the enemies outright, especially by the time you're probably getting this, because you do need to have 10 charisma to get this. Granted, you could just rush charisma right away and get some value out of this, but to get the last rank, you do have to be level 50, and I don't find that to be as useful as just being able to kill the enemies. So again, probably like another D tier perk. I don't think it's amazing, but it's not terrible by any means. Up next, we've got the intelligence perks. First up, we have Vans, which the first rank of Vans makes it so you can locate the closest quest displayed in VATS, which is okay, I guess. And then the second rank gives you +2 perception permanently. That's also okay, but you're spending 2 points on this instead of 2 points on perception. It still gets you 2 points in perception though, so it's like a base of 0. You don't really get or lose anything from that. Some of the perks in perception can be pretty good, and if you went with high intelligence right away, then this might be a decent option rather than putting more points into perception right away. I don't know. This one's weird. It technically gives you a little bit of a bonus, but it's like it breaks even with its bonus. So like I would say this one's like D tier. Medic has 4 ranks, and Medic makes it so Stimpaks heal more than they would, and it also makes it so Radaway heals more than it would. Both those are really good, especially early on into the game. There's no problem throwing extra points into Medic early on. It's going to be a solid skill no matter what build you have. And with 2 intelligence, it's not that bad of an investment, even if you wanted to go with like an idiot Savant build. Intelligence bonus doesn't honestly matter that much with that particular perk. We'll talk about that once we get to it. So I would say Medic is like A tier. I think it's really good. Then we've got Gun Nut. Gun Nut makes it so you can build different upgrades to your weapons. You can put different mods on them, and that is really, really strong, especially for guns, because a lot of their damage can just come from mods. Now, you don't necessarily need to build this right away. If you are doing a gun build, then this one is probably going to be one of your staples. I would say it's like right up here or up into A tier with something like Blacksmith, where you still definitely want it on a dedicated guns build. If you're not using guns and you're using melee or unarmed, then this one is far lower, obviously. But if you are using guns to any extent, you're probably going to want Gun Nut on there, at least a couple levels into it, so you can put some of the more useful attachments onto your weapon. Then we have Hacker. Hacker makes it so you can hack into terminals. It's basically the same as lockpicking here, and it's also going to go up into A tier. Oh, whoops, that's not Hacker. I think that's Scavenger, which is up next. Then we have Scrapper, which Scrapper has 3 ranks, and Scrapper makes it so you can scrap different items, and you can potentially get more common components or uncommon components from them. That can be useful, but it's not necessary whatsoever. The highest I would put this one is like C tier, and that's kind of stretching it because it's really not necessary. Then we have Science. Science is basically the same thing as Gun Nut, but for energy weapons. So it's also going to go up into B tier. Even more so if you want to use energy weapons and you want to use power armor, then this plus armor are going to be like your go-to ones that you need. Then we have Chemist, which Chemist is making an appearance again in Fallout, and it is extremely strong in Fallout 4 as well. This one makes it so chems last 50% longer, 100% longer, or up to 200% longer, which is really, really good, especially when you combine it with chem resist, which makes it so you're immune to all the negative effects of chems. And you can take like Jet and Psycho and Medics, and they last a really long time, and they'll probably last the whole fight. Not as necessary in Fallout 4 as it is in some of the other games, because some of these chems aren't super rare to find in Fallout 4. You can actually get a decent amount of them. So I think I'm going to put Chemist up into A tier, but I think it's bordering on like S tier. Can be really good, especially if you start pumping points into it early on. Then we have Robotics Expert. Robotics Expert doesn't actually give you more damage towards robots, but it does make it so you can turn off robots, you can set them to self-destruct, or you can make them frenzy and attack other nearby enemies. Those can be kind of good, but you're not running into a whole lot of robotic enemies throughout a lot of Fallout 4. Towards the end, kind of, but throughout most of it, not so much. The Mechanist DLC being the exception here. And just being able to turn them off is fine, but it's really not necessary unless you're going with like a sneak build, or maybe you're going with a pacifist build on this. In which case, I think this one's just kind of okay, and I would say it's like C tier. Then we've got Nuclear Physicist. Nuclear Physicist makes it so all of your fusion cores last longer. You also get more damage with radiation weapons, which is kind of cool, but doesn't usually matter that much. Most of the weapons in the game don't do radiation damage. And the last rank of this is kind of funny when you can eject the spent fusion cells to blow up like a grenade. Even when you're taking power armor throughout the whole game, it's usually not that hard to find a lot of fusion cores just laying around the map and having enough to just constantly have your power suit running if you're taking power armor. Maybe if you're taking power armor and you intend on rushing a Gatling laser early on, this might be a little bit better, but I feel like this perk is not necessary in a lot of builds. It's fine enough, but I think another like C tier perk. With Nerd Rage, whenever you drop below 20% of your maximum health, you gain a lot of damage resist, and you gain extra damage when attacking enemies. This can be 20% and 20 damage resist, 30% and 40% depending on the rank that you get. Nerd Rage can actually be pretty good, especially in the early game, and even into the later game. This can still save you occasionally, because you might not realize you're taking as much damage, and then the slow motion kicks in. That could be a good time to heal up, or to take cover, or to just kill whoever's fighting you at the end. So it's really not that bad, but you do need to hit the 10 intelligence requirement for this, so I think I'm going to put this into B tier. Not that it's super difficult to hit the max rank in any of these, but it does take extra points of investment to it, so I think B tier is fair for this one. Then we've got the agility perks, where first up we have Gunslinger. Gunslinger is very similar to Rifleman, where you get 20% more damage for non-automatic handguns, which makes it so the 44 is ridiculously strong, and same goes with the Western Revolver. I have a clip, or at least a short, up on the channel that shows me just killing Deathclaws very, very easily with a 44 revolver. So this one also pretty good. I'd probably also say it's like A tier, similar to Rifleman. Or S tier. I don't think it's quite as good as Rifleman, but still probably belongs up there. Then we have Commando, which gives you 20% more damage with automatic weapons per level. This one's, again, similar to like Rifleman and to the Gunslinger, so I'd also say this one's probably like S tier. You don't really need that much agility investment into it, and it's pretty easy to fit like automatic weapons into the game too. Automatic weapons can be extremely strong, especially with some of the legendary effects that you can get on them, where you can get like staggering, you can get explosive, you can get bleed. Some of them are really, really crazy of the things that you can get, so I would put Commando also up here. Then we have Sneak. Sneak makes it so you're more difficult to detect, and also whenever you engage in stealth, at least at the high rank of it, or the max rank of it, you do kind of go invisible for a second. That is pretty good. And sneaking around is really strong in Fallout 4. It's strong in almost all the Fallout games. So I would say Sneak is probably like A tier as well. It's actually really useful to have, especially in the early ranks where you might be more susceptible to certain enemies attacking you. This way you could potentially get out of those bad situations, or get a reset to where you can hit them with another sneak crit, which can be pretty useful too. Mr. Sandman is actually a lot better in Fallout 4 than it is in the other Fallout games, because it still has the same kind of gimmicky effect where you can kill people in their sleep, which doesn't usually matter. This does give you extra XP like it does in every game, but it's whatever. The main advantage this one has is that you get extra sneak damage with silent weapons, though. And that's pretty good. You put a suppressor on like a hunting rifle and you snipe at people a ways away, you're going to get extra damage. This isn't a crazy amount of damage, but it's still extra damage, so I would say this one's like B tier. It's actually not too bad. Then we have Action Boy / Action Girl. This one makes it so your action points regenerate faster. Since action points matter a whole lot more in Fallout 4, this one's actually really good. Especially in the early ranks where you might be running out of action points. In the later game, it doesn't matter. You have so many action points that you're probably never going to run out unless you're just spamming VATS constantly. And even then, you probably have a VATS build which can do that. So this one does start out pretty good, but it does kind of fall off the later the game goes, and you really don't need to invest that much into it. But it's nice early on, especially if you're just sprinting around. So I'm going to say this one's like C tier. Then we have Moving Target. This one makes it so you get extra damage resist towards regular damage and energy weapon damage whenever you're sprinting. You also have 50% reduction in your action point uses when you're sprinting too. Again, this one's kind of nice, especially if you get it early on. The later ranks you're not going to be able to get way early on, but it's still okay. There's a decent amount of time where you will be sprinting, especially if you're running a dedicated melee or unarmed build. You're probably going to be running at enemies pretty often. And for that, this one I would probably also say is like C tier. It's kind of similar to Rooted. If you combine both these, it's actually not too bad, because then you're going to have 50% damage reduction like whenever you're using melee or unarmed, whether you're either just going to be sprinting at enemies or you're going to be holding still. Then we have Ninja, which Ninja is absolutely insane. Ninja kind of breaks the game for any build. Ninja makes it so your sneak attacks do more damage, starting out at the low end of 2.5 times bonus damage. For guns, it's 4 times for melee and unarmed, and going all the way up to 3.5 times bonus normal damage, or 10 times extra damage with melee and unarmed. Yeah, Ninja's going right up into S tier. You can not build anything for any particular weapon and just have Ninja and one-shot a lot of enemies. It is surprising how strong this is, especially on a sneak build. And then we have Quick Hands. Quick Hands makes it so you reload all guns faster. That's pretty good, at least for the first rank. After that, it honestly isn't that great because it doesn't really matter. It gives you more action points, and reloading guns in VATS doesn't cost any action points either, which is okay, that's whatever. Faster reloads, though, at the gate is pretty good, so putting 1 point into this, pretty nice. Probably like a C tier perk. Putting the other points into this, it would probably drag it down to like a D or an F tier perk. Like, with all of it in there, it's really not that good. With just the first rank, pretty good. So, I don't know, let's split the difference and put it in D tier. It's fine. Then we have Blitz. Blitz makes it so in VATS, you can melee and unarmed further away than you otherwise would. So you can just dash right up to enemies. That's really strong in a melee or unarmed build that focuses on VATS. If you're already using power armor, you can kind of just do this without the aid of VATS. And if you're doing this with chems, then you can also do it without the aid of VATS. But it's not a bad perk on those builds. I would say it's like C tier. On every other build, much less. Probably D or F tier if you're using like a guns build only. Gun Fu makes it so you deal more damage to extra enemies that you fire at in VATS. So you fire at the first enemy, you're doing standard damage. The second enemy, you're doing more damage. And then the third enemy, you're doing even more damage. Or the fourth enemy, you're doing even more damage. Up to 4 enemies, I believe. Again, I don't really use VATS all that much, but this is kind of like a really fun one to have for VATS, and it's pretty strong. It's not as strong as something like Ninja, but I would still say this one's like B tier. It's pretty good on like a VATS build. Outside of a VATS build, it can still be pretty decent. just because there's a decent chance you can lock onto at least 2 enemies and get a little bit more bonus damage. And then finally we have luck for our last special stat, where our first one is Fortune Finder. Fortune Finder makes it so that you get more bottle caps in containers. There's also a chance that enemies explode into caps, which is kind of funny, and I do like the sound effect of it. It basically does the bottle cap mine animation, then you can pick them up off the ground later, but it's really not necessary. A lot of the time you don't need extra money. And honestly, when it does explode on your screen, it actually takes up a decent chunk of your screen. So sometimes it's kind of difficult to see enemies that are right up next to you. Totally not necessary, but kind of cool. I would say it's like D tier. And then we have Scrounger. Scrounger makes it so we find more ammunition off of enemies or off of containers. That can be pretty good because you can find fusion cores off of this, which is really nice. And that's going to be its major advantage. After that, you really don't need tons and tons of ammo in Fallout 4. A lot of merchants sell ammo. It's usually not very expensive. A lot of enemies have ammo. I've rarely ran into ammo issues besides at the very start of Fallout 4. So, like, C tier, this one's fine. And then we've got Bloody Mess. Bloody Mess makes it so you get extra damage, 5%, 10%, or 15% more damage onto enemies, as well as they can explode. And with the final rank of this, you can potentially cause a chain reaction where you kill one enemy and then explodes a different enemy and just kills them instantly. Which that is pretty cool when that happens. It can also trigger on you, weirdly enough, if there's no enemies around, but it doesn't actually do any damage to you. So Bloody Mess is pretty decent actually on most builds. I would say it's like B tier. Then we have Mysterious Stranger. Mysterious Stranger is just like it is in all the Fallout games, where the Mysterious Stranger can show up in vats and gun down enemies. That's kind of cool. I don't use vats again. It's a nice bonus to vats builds early on though, so I will say that, and I'll put it like C tier. I think it's fine. Then we've got Idiot Savant. Idiot Savant is probably one of the best perks in the game, because this does get you more XP, and as often as I harp on XP perks or level up perks in the Fallout games, that's not the case with Fallout 4 because you can level up and keep leveling up until you've maxed out absolutely everything, where you can't necessarily do that in like Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 3. You can in Fallout 4 though, and this just makes it so the process goes so much faster. Idiot Savant makes it so the lower your intelligence is, the higher chance this has of triggering, and this can trigger any time that you get experience. This gives you bonus experience every time this does trigger. This can be 3 times XP, 5 times XP, or 5 times XP with a 3 times XP added on to that for every action that you do within a certain amount of time. Idiot Savant is just really, really good, and I would always recommend that you take it, especially early on, just so you can level up faster and you can get to the perks that you want quicker. So I would say it's S tier. Up next we have Better Crits. Better Crits makes it so you get extra crit damage. That's pretty good. You can trigger crits inside vats, although I think that sneak crits also count towards this too, which is pretty good as well. And if you're going with like a ninja build, which is already kind of busted, this makes it so you hit even harder. This one is pretty strong too. I would say this one's like A tier, especially on a VATS build, and this one's probably S tier. Outside of a VATS build, still really good though, and probably like A or B tier for them. Critical Bank makes it so that you can store up crits inside of your VATS. So you can save up to 4 crits with this, assuming you have it completely maxed out, and then you can use them whenever you need to during a fight. That can be pretty good. Again, if you're going with a dedicated VATS build, this one is probably one of the best ones. Even outside of that, so long as you're using VATS to some extent, it's still quite good. And I would say it's probably like A or B tier. For me personally, I'm going to say B tier because I don't use VATS a whole lot. Then we have Grim Reaper Sprint, which Grim Reaper Sprint is not nearly as strong as it is in like Fallout 3. It's more similar to like how it is in New Vegas, where Grim Reaper Sprint makes it so whenever you kill an enemy inside of VATS, there is a chance, a 15, 25, or 35% chance that you will refill all of your action points, and you can potentially refill your crit modifier, or your crit meter. If you're going with a dedicated VATS build, again, this one is probably one of the best ones. If you're not going with a dedicated one, this one is still pretty decent. I would say it's like B tier. Then we have the 4-leafed Clover. 4-leafed Clover has 4 ranks, and it makes it so every time that you hit enemies in VATS, there's a chance that you can fill up your crit meter faster. Again, in a dedicated VATS build, pretty good. In a non-dedicated VATS build, decent enough. And probably like another like B or A tier, somewhere around there. And then for our very last perk, we have Ricochet. Ricochet is actually a super fun perk. This one has 3 ranks, and it makes it so whenever an enemy shoots at you, there's a chance that the enemy's bullet ricochets and doesn't hit you. And when it does miss you, it has a chance of killing the enemy that fired it, which is pretty good. And if you get this maxed out, it can also fill up your crit meter. This one's actually super fun to have, even though it's not at all reliable. It's still a very, very fun perk to have. So I would recommend you try it out if you've never tried it before. But in terms of actual usefulness, this one's probably like C or B tier. A lot of the time the Ricochet doesn't matter. And if it does happen, sometimes it kills an enemy that you didn't care about anyway. Like there's some raider plinking at you with a pipe pistol, and then he died from this, and it completely ignored the super mutant firing a minigun at you. But this can be really funny when this does work. And that's where I'd put all of the perks in Fallout 4. Now, in Fallout 4, you can actually max out every single perk, and you max your character out completely. So even some of these perks that are in like the C and D tier, you could still totally get just because they're pretty useful for other builds. It's just you're probably not going to prioritize them, and that's kind of how I laid this out. Tell me what your perk tier list would be down in the comments below. Which ones are your favorite? Which ones are your least favorite? And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you guys so very much for watching it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye!